Hi, and welcome to Manned Up Conversations, where we connect with evolving men to discuss issues around masculinity and manhood, and also provide tools to help us be better for our society.
I think help is available. It's just, I think, I always say to people when I do talks, the biggest part of the battle is taking that first step and saying, I'm not okay and I need help. If you've made that step, then you're halfway there, more than halfway. Then it's just the logistics about finding a therapist or finding a psychiatrist or figuring out what kind of help. But that self-recognition of I need help, let me reach out. If you get to that point, you're okay. Then you've taken the plunge. You've said, look, I'm not okay and I need help.
So thank you for tuning in. And if you enjoy the show, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and share with your friends and family to help us reach our fellow brothers and be part of the evolution as men. Okay now. Oh, man. Leon De Beer is here with me today, man, and we're at the South African Federation of Mental Health. As you can see, we chose a sunny background, bit of a different setup, because I think the conversation is a bit too intense, so keeping it kind of casual like this
for sure
will allow us to kind of, process our stuff a little bit easier.
For sure.
But before I get into what we're going to be talking about exactly, man, Leon, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's nice to be back at the office on a slightly chilly winter day, but it's awesome. Yeah, great. Thank you for having me.
No, for sure, man. Leon, I mean, you work for the South African Federation of Mental Health, like I said, and you're doing some very important work as the deputy director, right? And you wrote, as we know, we're at the tail end of Mental Health Awareness Month, or Men's Health Month.
Men's Health
Month.
Yeah.
But of course, men's mental health plays into that, right?
Yeah.
And you wrote a very interesting article that I found was much needed. I think the conversation around how we process our emotions, how we deal with our emotions, and maybe our lack of dealing with our emotions sometimes leads to a very important topic, which is suicide. But before we get into maybe all the other layers of suicide, I mean, you said in your newsletter that as a middle-aged man, you've also navigated some challenges yourself. And as I think I listened to a podcast recently where they were talking about middle-aged men, that's where the risk is most likely, to happen. But tell me a little bit about how, you've kind of navigated some of those challenging emotions, man.
So I think, I think my challenges very much stemmed from life just happening. Predominantly the breakdown of my first marriage, which was very difficult for me. And I think that was very triggering in terms of problems with my mental health. And specifically also getting to such an extent where, I started thinking about suicide. I'll be honest with you. And it's quite strange we're having this conversation here because at that time, my office was located 5 meters from where we are standing now.
Wow. Okay.
And I was sitting in that very office, staring out the window for ages. As I said in the piece I wrote, with the color literally draining out of the world, staring aimlessly out of the window, feeling completely lost and hopeless. And really feeling my mental health plummeting really badly. And it was a real journey that started there for me. Fortunately, the thing that made a change to my life, and that actually, in hindsight, I'd go as far as to say that saved my life because I was really grappling with suicidal ideation. And the thing that made a difference, and I think this is one of the really important messages that people need to understand, is that all it takes is one person.
Man.
I had one person who one day walked past, looked at me, reversed back, looked at me again and said, do you mind me asking, but are you okay? Because lately you haven't seemed okay. And in that moment, I was immediately at a crossroads in my life. I knew at that moment it hit me like a 10-ton truck.
Wow.
I was like, if I say yes to this person and I say, I'm fine, they'll walk away and I'll carry on down the slippery slope that I am. If I say no, it means they're going to say, okay, well, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Fortunately, I chose to say, actually, you know what? Because I was feeling tired, man. I was feeling like there's just no hope. I was thinking about my children and everything. And I was thinking, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
And so I chose to say, no, I'm actually not okay. It developed into a conversation. Mm-hmm. And that day I realized that I needed to go and find a therapist. Wow. Right there. That day, I started Googling and looking for therapists in my area. And that was the first step towards mending.
Man.
So, yeah, it's been quite a journey. I still live with a bit of depression and anxiety. And, you know what it's like. Life triggers it. Sometimes you have good days. Sometimes you have days that are not so great.
Yeah.
But at least I've never been in that space again where I was sitting there and feeling that life was over for me. And I've been very fortunate in my life that through therapy and medication and lifestyle changes and just having wonderful people around me that supported me, I managed to make it through it. And what saddens me is that so many guys out there don't make it through it. And this is why I wrote the article on suicide in men. It's because it's heartbreaking how many men lose their lives to suicide, man.
Man. I'm even like tearing up a little bit here, man. And I listened to what you say, and you spoke about color, man, and color is very important when it comes to that. There's a certain group that I attended, call it a camp, getaway, a men's getaway, and we'd kind of have to explain our emotions and put a color to it, right? And based on the colors you use, you kind of then get an idea of where this person's at, right? So listening to that, it's like depression just shuts your whole world down, man. It's like everything's just gray for you. Right?
It was and in the article I wrote, I speak about, and I quote someone in the literature that talks about a kind of a tunnel vision developing. And when I read that, when I was writing the article, it just hit me off my feet because that's what I felt. It was like a tunnel vision, and it was black and white. The world outside, I had beautiful flowers and shrubbery and stuff outside my office window. But everything, it was black and white and static. It was literally as if the world had just stopped existing, and the color had run out of the world in the way that I guess my life force was draining out of me as a person. And that was very scary for me.
Man.
It was very scary.
And you talk about a person who saw you, right? And I shared this in a few of my interviews and some conversations that I've had where I said, during my years in varsity, I had an experience where I used to write quite extensively about what I was feeling, what I was going through. And one of my friends saw that, and he asked me to read it back to him, and I couldn't finish this piece, right? Yeah. And it just takes someone most of the times, right? Someone who's outside and they can see it. But for you, was it someone who knew you? Was it someone just random, a stranger?
No, it was someone I knew. Yeah. It was someone I knew and who knew me fairly well, but not like very, very, very close. But it was someone who knew me well enough to spot that I wasn't okay. Yeah. It was someone who had obviously seen for a little while that I wasn't, who I was before.
Yeah.
And that was really all it took. And this is why I always, when I talk about mental health and I do interviews and I talk to groups of people, wherever we go, I always challenge people, and I always say to people, I do a lot of talks in corporates and conferences and those kind of things. And I always leave people with the message, and that is, be that person. Be that person that cares enough to stop and go, hey man, are you okay? Don't ever ignore it. Don't ever think, oh gosh, I don't want this to become my problem. Or maybe this person might feel that I'm being too intrusive. Actually, you can, and if I take myself as an example, you can literally save, man, I was writing suicide notes, man.
Yeah, man.
That's at the level I was. I was writing goodbye notes to my family. That's where I was.
Wow.
And it took one person who just took a moment and said, hey man, are you okay? And that's all it took. It saved my life. Man. And that's why I challenge people. And I say to people, like, don't ignore it. If you see someone struggling, if you think someone's not okay, like, ask them.
Man.
And you don't know what a difference you could make. All they could say is, yeah, I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. And that's cool.
That's okay too.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But at least you've tried. But there might be instances where that person just goes, actually, you know what I could just do with a cup of coffee? Can we just go and have a chat? And you never know what you can do for that person. So I always say to people, like, be that person and don't be afraid to reach out and like extend an empathetic hand and say, I'm here if you want to talk.
I love that you use the word empathy, man. I think our community or our society needs a lot of empathy right now. You know, we're dealing with a lot of pressure in South Africa as a country. You know? I'm sure I know a lot of people who are not working. I know a lot of people who are financially stranded. I know a lot of people who've lost stuff. There's a lot of grief as well, which also hits us very hard as men, right?
Definitely.
And it manifests differently in most of us. But when you look at kind of, you know, in your own way, like what are some of the other issues, you know, besides just loss of work, loss of status? What other issues have you picked up around, maybe in conversations that you've had, that are causing men to get suicidal? Huh?
I mean, I think financial pressures is a big one. I think breakdown of relationships. I think men not getting diagnosed with depression. And there's a whole thing around that, around women getting diagnosed more with depression, but men completing more suicides. So there's a contrast or some kind of a conundrum there. And the reason for it is broadly twofold. Men have poor help-seeking behavior. So guys tend to, and we can talk about, like, you know, what drives that, the societal stereotypes, big boys don't cry and toughen up and man up. And
get into that.
So men don't look for help, but also, even if they do look for help, often depression gets missed in men because it doesn't look like what we traditionally think depression looks like. You know, low mood, feeling tired, not being able to get out of bed. For me, my depression manifested in irritability, anger, frustration, like just cynicism, feeling really like just unhappy with the world. And I've never in my life thought that was depression. But it was only when I started obviously reading up and when I saw somebody that they pointed out to me. And even I work in mental health. And I was blinkered to this. I only found out when I was speaking to somebody and they said to me...
That's a very important observation there, because I think a lot of people in the mental health space, we deal with a lot of this stuff. And you'll find, I think I read somewhere that, you know, people who've explored their own darkness, sort of their own inner world, are in a better place to sort of work in the space because they kind of know the nuances that come with mental health challenges, right?
It creates, I think, working in this space. I mean, even, you know, I went to university when I finished school. I once read this thing about this quote from somebody who said they went to study psychology not to get a job description, but to get an education. And that was so true because I left school and my aptitude tests and everything said, no, you have to go, you have to be an accountant or work in tourism. And I was like, that's not me. I want to learn about myself and I want to understand myself and I want to understand the world. And so I went to study psychology and I did philosophy and sociology and all other kind of things. Not because I wanted to be a psychologist necessarily, but because I wanted that knowledge to understand, because I had a lot of questions as a kid and I had a quizzical mind. And so studying that set me on a path to developing a better understanding of mental health and help sort of helped me to navigate career choices where I ended up not working as a psychologist, but working in community development and as a human rights activist, disability rights activist, those kind of things. But just getting back to your question earlier, I'm sorry, I didn't finish answering you. I was talking about relationship breakdowns and other triggers for men.
Sure.
I think one of the big problems is also that men with undiagnosed depression, or even with diagnosed depression, sometimes medicate themselves with substances. And that can only go one way, and that's downhill. And I think, that can also lead to all sorts of, if you're really getting plastered and you're not in a good space mentally, it's a dangerous space to get in.
Man, Leon, I have to jump in that one because, we had a conversation on our WhatsApp group very recently, and kind of sending quotes to one of your colleagues around, what we're doing to take care of our mental health. And one of the guys in there had mentioned that, man, I won't lie, weed does it for me. And I was like, okay, I get it. I know the guy very well. And I said to him, but how well does that help you? How do you feel the next day?
Yeah.
Right? Do you feel like you've done any work, or you've just kind of just put that to the side and say, well, tomorrow I'll deal with it, right? And it just compounds.
Yeah.
And you spoke about knowing yourself, man, and narratives that we have around whether it's mental health, whether it's around being a man, whether it's around how do I deal with stuff. If you look at our society as well, most people are like, we don't believe in therapy, right? And there are other reasons that we'll also get into a little bit later in the conversation. But just looking at substance abuse and the rate of substance abuse in our country.
It's tremendous.
I have a cousin who used to live on the streets. He's just recovered now.
Yeah.
And then speaking to him in hindsight, he also speaks about that man, there's stuff that I learned in my process where I didn't even think about stuff like a low self-esteem.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of men deal with that lack of confidence and that type of thing. And obviously that leads to not being able to come to Leon and say that, Leon, listen, man, I'm struggling. I need some help. Yeah.
For sure. And also just, going again, it's that horrid societal norm of, it's not okay for us to talk about our mental health. It's not okay for you to come to me and say, hey, dude, I'm not doing okay. I just need someone to talk to. We rather bottle it up. And when you bottle up those emotions, they fester and they become unhealthy. And then what happens is men start medicating them away with substances. When you look at substance abuse and you look at mental health or mental illness, there's a very complicated chicken and egg relationship between the two because the one can lead to the other. So if you are abusing substances, you were talking about your friend who smokes marijuana. He's at risk of triggering, because that can trigger a mental illness, a full-blown mental illness. And the other side is persons with mental illness, sometimes if the symptoms are not managed properly, they self-medicate with substances and develop a substance use disorder. So the two is a very complicated relationship between the two. Wow. And that's why, and I often hear this when I go talk to guys in corporates and wherever I go, when people start getting relaxed and they open up and you ask them, how do you de-stress? They'll say, I smoke a bit of weed or, and I mean, it's not something I can ever endorse because you will always run the risk of triggering a mental health condition through a substance like that. But it's the reality of life, eh?
Man. Coping strategies, man, are just something else. And I think in knowing yourself, we were speaking about journaling a little bit now.
Yeah.
I've used my journals as a way to kind of explore my own world, I kind of tell people most times, like, man, I can't really offer you much, but what I can offer you, man, is just get to know yourself a little bit. And one of the best ways to do that is by journaling. Yeah. You might not like most of the stuff that comes out of there because our inner world is very intricate, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff in there. But once you now put it, you can see it.
Yeah.
Then you can like, oh wow, this is what's happening. Right? I can maybe do something with this.
For sure.
And now, we're speaking a little bit about reaching out to Leon and saying that, Leon, I need some help. There's something that I'm learning now, which is speaks to unsolicited advice, man. And I think a lot of times unsolicited advice comes as a mask for me not wanting to help out, right? I'm just gonna give you something just to get rid of you.
Yeah.
Right? and a lot of guys do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, that's very complicated. Instead of saying, and I've said this to a few people, that, man, that's really difficult. I actually don't know what to do with that, you know?
Yeah.
Instead of saying that, I'll get into like this whole speech and talk about things that I don't get, don't understand.
Maybe to touch on that, the one thing that I had a very interesting conversation with someone about 2 months ago at a talk I did. And this person was saying that they have become the sounding board for a very close friend who has a very severe mental illness. And that this person just offloads on them all the time. And they've given this person all the empathy and advice and everything that they could possibly give them. And even, the person was also suicidal. And this person said, I have nothing left to give. So when this person comes to me and they offload on me, I start, I don't know what to say, or I start talking about trivial things because I feel this responsibility for them. And I think it's also recognizing that if somebody asks you for help and you are willing to talk to them, you also need to look after yourself.
Yes, sir.
Because actually being the sounding board for somebody who's in a very dark space can be very taxing on your own mental health. And it can really have a massive effect on you. If you and I were sitting having a cup of coffee and out of the blue, I said to you, hey, KG, I'm thinking of taking my own life. I mean, it could really take the wind out of you. Hey.
Yeah, for sure.
And I put you in a difficult position because then you have to respond in a way that's not going to make you feel guilty if I take my own life tonight. So it's difficult. It's a conundrum we have in that I say to people, be that person that asks or that reaches out, or be the empathetic ear. But with that comes a responsibility to go.
Exactly.
If you hear something back, be prepared to deal with it. And know that it can impact on yourself, but also know that it's not your responsibility to necessarily fix everything or save the person. And that's what I said to this person that I was talking to, is that look after yourself, but know that there's a point where you need to get professional help involved. Because if you're not a qualified psychologist and somebody constantly offloads on you about their mental health, it's going to seriously affect you.
Man, I've definitely experienced that quite a lot.
Yeah.
One of the groups that I ran, I had to tell some of the guys that, listen, I need a break from all of this stuff because it's a bit too much for me.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the reasons also for myself is I also took it upon myself to be like, hey, I put it out there to say I'm going to help people.
Yeah.
And now, the responsibility is so big, right? So I have to do something, whether it's 2 a.m, someone calls, I can't be like, no, man, I can't do it. But at the same time, realizing that that's actually not a very helpful thing to do. Right? It's better for me to tell people that, listen, I cannot do this. Let me take a break for myself.
For sure.
Give myself compassion to say that, listen, guys, I understand there's a lot going on, but this is where I'm also struggling.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of creates a better relationship between me and the people that I'm trying to help or people that I'm working with. Because then you can see that it's not only them that are dealing with stuff. That people who are in the space, even professionals,
of
also
course.
deal with a lot of this stuff,
No, and I think the key thing, using your example and the people that you work with or support, I think that honesty and showing that vulnerability in yourself is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because none of us are invincible, are we? So I think it's also about setting healthy boundaries and making people understand that you're there for them. But actually, if you're going to phone me at 2:00 in the morning, I'm not going to be much use to you.
Exactly.
So it's about respecting your boundaries and being able to say that to people in an honest yet compassionate way and explaining to people that these are the reasons why. But it can be very difficult. We run a help desk here at the organization, and some of the inquiries we get are heavy, man. It's and we have to make sure that our own staff who deal with those are also okay in the process of helping really vulnerable people or people that are going through immense hardships. So it's a balance between helping and self-care.
Exactly.
I guess that's what I'm trying to say in a very convoluted way.
Man, I love it, man. And now, I want to get into the culture a little bit. So the beauty of this conversation now is you are Afrikaans, right? And I'm a Motswana guy. And usually I get this question like, black people, we don't take mental health seriously. We don't believe in that stuff.
Yeah.
But when reading your articles, like you kind of alluded to that in your culture, so to speak, there's also a little bit of, we get it, but like what is this thing, right? So is it even fair to say that it's only in this one culture?
No, to be honest with you, I firmly believe, and I'm not quoting research, I'm talking about my own experience,
of course,
is that I think the stigma related to men and mental health transcends all cultures.
Yes, sir.
And I'll speak about my own culture. I grew up in the apartheid era and those days, and the world was a hard place, and and in our culture, and I'm not saying it's changed now because it's not. I don't think it has changed. Yeah. But there was no space for boys showing emotions. It's like, if you cry, you're a sissy. It's like, bottle it up, boy.
Yeah.
There's no space for it at school, with your friends. I was always, I guess, to a certain, and that's why I ended up doing this kind of work. Sure. I was always, growing up in the apartheid era, I was always aware that the world around me was broken. And even at a young age, I didn't necessarily understand why, but I could see that the world wasn't right. And that's what triggered me to get into the world of community development, etc. But I think even at a young age, I can remember, I think I was always a slightly more sensitive boy than the rest of the kids. And especially in high school, if I think back about, if there was any conversation about feelings or, anything, you would just get berated and treated like a piece of rubbish or like laughed at, belittled.
Shamed, man. Yeah.
Same in the family environment, it's about being tough and about, we had, as you know, we had compulsory military service in our country. I missed it with 1 year.
Wow.
I still got the paperwork.
Okay.
And I was like, oh dear, I have to go and point guns at people and shoot people that I don't want to kill. Unfortunately, it got scrapped the year before me. So
lucky for you, man.
I never went through that trauma.
Yeah.
And I think that also had a big effect on me because, if I think about a lot of men in our country who went through the military and the amount of PTSD we sit with in this country just because of that compulsory military service and all those kind of things. But it was, so your question, I think that stigma around men is embedded in our society, regardless of culture.
Yes, sir.
There might be different drivers behind it, but it all comes down to the same thing, as in like, we're men, we're not allowed to talk about it. If you talk about it, you're a sissy, bottle it up, man up, get tough. Do you know what I mean?
Man. I listened to this conversation. I've had this conversation with so many guys, right? And the funny thing is we kind of avoid the topic, we'll speak around it, but not to the point. Right? But how much do you think like evolution has played a part in kind of how we are as men right now? So I'll give you an example, right? So when you think about it, you mentioned that I'm using your army experience, sort of almost army experience as an example here, that men were considered, you have to go fight.
Yeah.
Now, if you were a sensitive person at that time, you had to suppress that, right?
Yeah.
So now, as you grow up, obviously your offspring would inherit some of those things.
Yeah.
Right. So now inheriting all of that has now landed on the children that are growing up, or the youth, and some of us now. And then when you think about that part now, it's like, man, is it a matter of sort of talking generationally, if that's even a word, about the stuff, going to our grandparents, and asking them about, man, but how did you even manage to make it through those times? And then once you kind of get that story from them, I think that can maybe give you a bit of understanding in terms of, man, these people were not actually bottling stuff up and it just kind of disappeared. It's actually still sitting there. And there's even more reason for me to break the chain.
Right? I think it's a very difficult conversation. If I think about, everybody in my family, the older men who did go to the army, some of them came back and eventually were able to verbalize their trauma and talk about it. And I have immense respect for that. It took them a very long time to do. But eventually they realized the impact of what they went through on themselves. And that impact was was affecting their families because they were living with unmanaged PTSD. But a lot of men at the same time will talk about their military service as, like one of it's like 2 whatever year, like the greatest years of their lives. And maybe it was for them. Maybe they did enjoy it, or maybe if they didn't, they don't know how to verbalize it again, because they don't want to be seen, as weak, because in those days, if you didn't want to do that, you'd be a traitor and you'd get thrown in jail. What I think is important, and I've got 2 kids. I've got a daughter who's 15 and a daughter who's 10. And if you ask me about intergenerational things, I think the importance is that we as the adults now, we realize what a responsibility we have. We have a huge responsibility, KG, because we are the ones that need to make sure that our children don't grow up with stigma attached to race. The stigma that I saw as a child, growing up in the apartheid era. And by the way, that kind of stigma and everything can also trigger mental illnesses, but that's a different conversation. If I think about that, how from a very young age, I taught my children that you treat people with respect regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, color, creed, whether they're disabled or not. And I taught my children from a very young age to be grateful for what they have. And I also, in a way that they could understand, taught them about mental health. And a couple of years ago, towards the end of the year, maybe 3 years ago, I suffered burnout, which was, apart from that episode that I spoke about earlier when I was in a very dark place, that was the other low point in my life when I had burnout. And I was, but eventually after it passed and I got through it, I spoke to my kids about it and I said to them, because they could see that I wasn't well and I was open to that. So what I'm trying to say is there's a responsibility on us. We are a critical generation, us adults now, because we saw what apartheid did. We've seen what the world is when there's stigma against persons with disabilities and mental illnesses. We saw, I was at the forefront in this organization of both the Life Esidimeni tragedy. I saw lives getting lost because people weren't looking after persons with mental illness and intellectual disabilities. And it's my responsibility to make sure that my kids grow up knowing those things. And it's about us as parents, owning up to the responsibility we have and not letting our kids make the same mistake and go through the same experiences that we went through as kids.
Oh, man.
If that makes sense.
Man, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I suppose that's why we're talking about this stuff now. It's such a mainstream conversation now, more than 10 years, 15 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
But then, I don't want to keep you here for way too long. But I think in terms of solutions, we've spoken at length about some of them, but as maybe a bit of a summary, maybe 3 things a person can do to sort of check in on themselves, reach out, where can they go? And maybe in terms of, you did speak about the conversation in family, but how do we make that, I don't want to say an easy conversation because it's never easy.
It's never easy.
But how do we then sort of change how we communicate to stuff?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's basically, how do we fix the world? It's difficult. I think it all starts with people being introspective and taking a moment and going, okay, who am I and what are my own biases and stereotypes? And doing that, for want of a better word, soul searching and going, okay, these are the things about which I hold worldviews that I can recognize are not appropriate or not, there isn't a place for it in the world today.
Yeah.
And I think starting with that is a really important part because I can't go and talk to a group of people about mental health or about disability or about whatever if I myself think that all persons with disabilities are incapable of working. Do you know what I mean? So much of this is introspection first. It starts with you yourself.
Sure.
Examining who you are, your stereotypes that you may hold, and then thinking about, well, what can I offer as someone, whom, not everybody works in mental health, but we all have a voice. And we can all do that thing that I said about, it's about awareness about the world around you. It's about not being blinkered, about looking out for people. If you see somebody struggling, going, are you okay? And also taking that into the family, not, I have a teenage daughter. Believe me, I know how difficult these conversations can be. And the whole, you're not looking okay today. Is there something you want to talk about? And breaking down those barriers. But it's about being empathetic and about not being forceful about it or aggressive about it. It's about trying to listen and saying, look, I'm here. If you want to talk, just let's have that conversation and let's try and break down the barriers that might exist between us. I think, and I don't know how we're going to do this. I know what the solution is. If we're talking about men and mental health, I think, it's about us challenging those societal stereotypes and getting men to come forward. And this is the first year that our organization has focused so intensely on Men's Health Month and around pushing a massive amount of literature and articles and life stories during this month. And it's really made me realize that, how many men there are out there that are struggling with these things. And I think it's about keeping this conversation going. And we can't just do it once a year. We need to live and breathe this every day. It's like, yes, maybe in June there's a big focus on it, but actually it's about making sure that we look after men, If you have a man in your life, it's about saying, are you okay? If you're not okay, let's talk about it. Can I help? Because often, like I said right in the beginning, men have terrible help-seeking behavior. They might not know where to go. So it's about saying, can I help you find a therapist? Can I go with you to see the psychiatrist? Again, so it's not so intimidating. So it's just about placing yourself there to be with the person. And it's about being brave. And
Thank you for that.
And not being scared to look after each other. Because like you said in the beginning also, our country needs it. Our country is, if you look at the triggers for mental illness, our country ticks all the boxes a million times over each day for millions of people.
We are 10th. We are ranked 10th in the world, man. That is, I don't want to go into stats and all of that, but that is very scary
when it comes to suicide rates. No, it's very, very, very scary. And the really scary thing is it's a lot of those suicides are like adolescents. It's not just old men my age. We're talking about children taking their own lives because of stigma. Because of not wanting to talk about mental health problems.
And that's that part where we're talking about making it a family conversation. Because I think if we start this thing in the home,
it has to start in the home. It has to. If I think about, again, going back to my childhood, where is your mind shaped? Yes, it's shaped in school and with teachers and friends, but who you are when you enter the educational system comes from your home environment. You go back to your home environment every day. So it's about recognizing that as a parent, it's not just my role to clothe and feed my kids and put a roof over their head and say, job done. It's about saying, actually, I want to help you become the best version of yourself that you can be. And that version of you should first and foremost be built on gratitude. So always saying thank you and appreciating everything you have. And the second thing is about caring for yourself, being proud of who you are, and caring about the people around you, whether it's your friends, your friends' parents, whoever. So yeah, it's a big responsibility for us as parents, but I think people need to own up to it and recognize that actually they have a responsibility. We're shaping young minds and we need to shape them in the right way.
Come on, guys, man. I mean, we've got a lot of work to do. I feel like I'm fortunate to be in this space, right? And as you say, it takes a lot of courage to be in there. It takes a lot of bravery to be in there. It's a lot of times it's like, man, you might feel a bit bleak when you hear these stories sometimes. Like, man, is this ever going to change? But we have to do something. We have to start somewhere, right? And as you say, carry on having these conversations.
Definitely.
So, I mean, to you listening to this right now, man, you might have someone in your circle who you think is going through something. If you feel a hunch, to want to ask, man, go ahead and ask. If the person feels offended, then hey, you can buy him a drink afterwards. You'll figure out what to do. But you're better off asking than not asking, right?
And you've tried,
man. And I've said something in one of my recent interviews and I thought I found this quite useful, that there's a lot of mistrust in therapy and all of these, or maybe in spaces like KG, I know this guy. I had a call from someone I used to work with. They didn't know that if they called a certain organization, they're gonna get referred to me.
Okay.
So when you heard, KG, I'm like, oh man, what's up? It's like, I'll call you back, man. I thought, are you sure? I can give you someone else's number. No, I'll call you back. And I had a reflection there, and I thought, you probably have a circle of friends, maybe you don't, but before you get to the stages where it's completely hectic and now you need to scramble for help, I think getting into groups, maybe I know 3-4 guys that I grew up with, if we all have jobs, we can afford to put together $200-300 or whatever. I think it's worth our while to pay a psychologist or a counselor or someone who knows about the stuff to say, guy, can you maybe spend 3 hours on a Saturday with us and just maybe have a check-in? Let's start forming these groups instead of waiting, there are no spaces for men. Let's look to ourselves and start creating these little spaces for ourselves.
Definitely.
Right?
No, and I mean, that's where I commend people like you and the support group that you run and everything like that, because I think you are an example of what we want men to be. Someone who says, I've had my own journey and I want to do something proactive about it. And and I'm helping others in the process. And that's what I'm talking about. That's about taking ownership over your life and about, taking ownership over the lives of other people and giving people a platform to, and a safe space to come and say, this is happening in my life. I'm struggling with this. And you don't have to be a qualified psychiatrist or psychologist. You can just be an ear and somebody else that goes, there's immense power in somebody being able to identify with you. If somebody says to me, I've contemplated suicide and I think, I'm the worst person in the world for thinking that. If I go, you know what? I've been there too, man. That kind of, because with this stuff, that sense of isolation, we've not really spoken about this, but I think if I go back to what I was speaking about, my experience when I was at my lowest, that feeling of being alone and isolation is the worst. It's like the feeling you felt in COVID when we were all isolated times 100. You feel that there's nobody in the world who understands you and who's interested in listening. And one person just going, hey man, are you okay? And actually, yeah, I hear what you're saying and I can understand you going through, this and this. Just that feeling that you're not on your own makes a massive difference. It makes a massive difference. Just that kind of, it's not just me. It's okay. And I feel validated. Yes, yeah. So even if I'm struggling with the worst thing possible and I think, goodness, I don't want to, who on earth is going to feel relatable to me? If somebody goes, you know what, it's okay, it's cool. And let's talk about it. That feeling of validation and being heard and not being alone. I think that's the responsibility we have.
Man, I love it, man. You give a man a platform to speak and you'll be surprised, like half of the stuff that comes out.
Yeah, for sure.
So I've learned in the work that I've been doing, man, is sometimes just one question and just sit back and listen. It requires a bit of patience as well. Yeah. And like you said, don't make it such an aggressive thing that, man, you need to talk. You're going to shut that person down.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not going to work with a group of men.
Exactly.
You need to make them feel safe and vulnerable. I think that's the other thing is about us coming to terms with the fact that it's okay to be vulnerable. And that's something that us guys struggle with, eh? I think in the article I wrote, I spoke about being comfortably vulnerable. And that's a good space. Where I'm in my life now, I'm married again. I've got the most wonderful wife in the world. My whole life has been restored to way better than what it's ever been.
Sure.
But I'm in a space where I can be comfortably vulnerable. If I'm not doing okay, I'm okay to speak about it. And I'm not ashamed to say, you know what, I'm having a bad day. I'm not feeling okay. Man. In the space that I work in, I'm very fortunate. I have a very close relationship with our director, my boss. And, she's walked a long journey with me and she knows me very well. And she's been through, she was there with my ups and downs and she knows about it. And, if things aren't okay, she's one of the first people that I'll tell. I'll say, things are a bit rough or I'm not doing okay. These are the reasons. This is, what I'm doing about it. And so I think, as I said in the article again, I think I'm one of the fortunate ones because I have that network at home and at work. And we need to create that for men, KG. We need to make sure that those spaces are created for men to feel comfortably vulnerable.
I love it, man. Comfortably vulnerable. Oh, come on, man. So, Leon, it's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you,
I can, just based on what you just said, now I'm thinking 100 other things. Like I told you, we can go from a 5-minute chat to easily 2 hours, 3 hours. But in the interest of time, man, where... in terms of your organization and maybe other spaces that men can reach out to that maybe you can just give maybe a few right now.
I mean, look, our organization runs a help desk. So it's not a crisis line or anything like that. It's office hours, but it's a referral service. And through that, we have access to counselors and we can put people in touch with mental health services that they require. We also have organizations like SADAG who run support groups across the country. So there are organizations, people can reach out to us on our website, www.safmh.org. You'll find a tab there about the help desk and all the various ways in which you can contact us. I think help is available. It's just, I think I always say to people when I do talks, the biggest part of the battle is taking that first step and saying, I'm not okay and I need help. If you've made that step, then you're halfway there, more than halfway. Then it's just the logistics about finding a therapist or finding a psychiatrist or figuring out what kind of help. But that self-recognition of I need help, let me reach out. If you get to that point, you're okay. Then you've taken the plunge. You've said, look, I'm not okay and I need help. And so, there is help available, but I want to encourage people to take up the help that is available
Yeah.
and not to sit with whatever you're dealing with on your own, and to reach out for help. And for men out there, I think to recognize that we live in a world now where we should learn that it's okay not to be okay. You don't have to be a tough guy. You don't have to drink your problems away. Help's available in abundance. You just need to be brave enough to say, I'm not okay and I need help.
Yeah. Be brave, guys. There are WhatsApp groups available, you know. I think sometimes being anonymous kind of helps, you know. You're not showing face so much. It might be a bit intimidating for some of you. So, man, seek out those WhatsApp groups. If you are in a WhatsApp group, maybe send it to one of your guys, you know, to say, hey, man, we in this group. Maybe you could find it beneficial. I don't know. But if you want to, you know, for the sake of your own interest, join us in there. You know, you never know who you're helping. I'll give one last example. There's a guy in our WhatsApp group. We spoke a few times. We share articles in there and a bunch of stuff. Earlier in the year, I said, guys, man, I'm alive. And thank God to KG. And I didn't do nothing to this guy. But that's what we're talking about, right? It's the little things that you can do for someone that you barely even recognize as giving help, because you are not forceful. You are not trying to change and fix people, but you are just offering some kind of help. So let's start it at that level. And I think, man, we'll be better men for that. We'll have a better society. We'll have better networks, better support, community, and a much more comfortably vulnerable society of men. I love it, man. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, KG.
With Leon Dubier. We at South African Federation for Mental Health, man. If you want to reach out, please do so. I'm going to add Leon's article in the show notes. I'm going to add a bunch of other links and other conversations we've had around mental health issues. But please, for sure, guys, definitely reach out. Seek out stuff on social media. Don't just sit there and think there's no hope. There's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of help out there. You might just be your own solution to these problems, right? So get on that journey. Do the right thing. It's been wonderful, man. Peace and love. Catch you on the flip side.